Greetings, folks. Euler here. Today I have a division replay from myself and Jimijaz in Tier 5 ships. I am in the premium Italian battleship, the Giulio Cesare, and Jimijaz is in the Soviet cruiser, the Kirov. We are in a Tier 6 domination match on fault line, and there are two Tier 6 aircraft carriers per team. Now, I'm going to do a slightly different format for this division replay than I've done for my past replays, and that's to first talk about a topic that I think has been quite prevalent on various forums, whether that be the official Wargaming or Warships forum or in the Facebook forums, and certainly has been very prevalent on various community contributor YouTube channels and so on. And that is the perception of a much higher ratio of lopsided games in warships as of late. And I have a few theories and thoughts about why I think this is that I wanted to cover in this video. And I will get to sort of the subject of the title of the video, which is to discuss the matchmaking aspect of this. Now, before I get to the matchmaking, I think the number one issue, in my opinion, for warships is the lack of education and the difficulty in learning warships as a game. It's very rich in mechanics. There's a lot of subtleties that once certain players understand very well, they tend to master and can tend to dominate over other players. And for there's a large player base that simply wants to play very casually, either because they don't want a high complexity game, or they like the theme of warships, but they don't have the time or means or capability to master some of the complexities of the game. But I think a big part of it as well is simply the lack of structured education for the community around how to play the game well. And I know Notzer and Flamu and a number of other well-known community contributors have all commented on this at some length in their own ways to basically say that players just don't learn to play the game well. And like I said, in some cases, it's situations that they don't have direct control over. They don't have the time to master some of the sophistication, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no laws that say that you have to commit a certain amount of time or you have to reach a minimum skill level. This is an open playing community. And then there are other players that may not have the capacity. They maybe have their own personal situations. They don't have the means to master a lot of the complexities of the game. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. They're welcome to play the game as much as anybody else. But where I think the frustration lies is the expectation that some significant portion of the player base should have the capacity and the time and the means to master the game better than they do, and they simply don't. And part of this may be a motivation on the player's part, and a big part of it, in my opinion, is the lack of structured education for users. Ideally, that would be built into the game itself, so that players could be learning real time as they're playing the game. And I know from my own personal experience, both for me learning the game as well as helping others, that actively telling people while they're playing the things that they should be looking out for, or how they should respond to certain situations, is probably the best method to learn how to play the game better, is to have that sort of very direct instruction. And some of that can be built into the game itself directly. Some of that may simply come through raw, live education with other players, where they have the means. And some players may not have access to that sort of, skilled player guidance that other players do. So I think education, continues to be the number one issue in terms of the imbalances in the game. But I want to get to the matchmaking aspect of that, because that's kind of the title of the video. And that is I suspect, is the lack of performance-based matchmaking that, or at least doesn't exist in warships. I know that a number of other online multiplayer games do have performance-based matchmaking so that teams are more evenly balanced based on their observed skill and performance levels from their past games. And so games tend to be a little more even. And you don't have such lopsided games due to a heavy imbalance of skill. But it may simply be that in warships, that just doesn't exist, or that opportunity does not exist because the player base is too small. We recently saw that Wargaming offered a limited one-time offer to move for people to move their accounts from one server to another, and I kind of suspect, this is just my personal suspicion, that that was largely aimed at users on the Southeast Asia server where the population is the lowest. And I suspect that a lot of Southeast Asia players would welcome the opportunity to play in in North America, where they probably have reasonably good response times from a network perspective, but the player base is much larger, and therefore they probably be a much more competitive environment. But the point is that the player base may simply be inadequate to be able to support a performance-based matchmaking, which again would be ideal, I think, or preferable, I should say. So, just kind of my thoughts on this. This has been continues to be a frustration, certainly for myself and my clan mates and my division mates, where we go into battles and we just routinely see these stompings, and it can be on both sides. It's obviously very frustrating to be on the team that loses very badly, even though in certain individuals, like in this game, we're going to see that Jimijaz and myself will do our best to try to keep our team in the game, but you can see that we already have a 3-ship deficit. We only hold 1 cap. We're behind by over 500 points. And so you can probably guess that this is going to end up being a loss, but it's a reflection of sort of these very imbalanced games. It's also can be quite frustrating, in my opinion, to be on the winning side, because in games where you have this overwhelming lead, and actually I should point out here, I said at the beginning of the battle this was a tier 6 match, and that was wrong. It's actually a tier 5 match, and there are 2 tier 4 carriers per team. Excuse me, I apologize for that error. But in any case, it can be quite frustrating to be on the on the winning team when you have these very lopsided games, because you simply can't you don't get much enjoyment out of it. You don't feel very challenged. You don't you feel like, if you put on some special camos or signals to try to earn some extra credits or XP, and you have this sort of this really lackluster win because your team completely stomps the opposing team and there just wasn't much to earn from it, those can also be very frustrating. So just kind of my thoughts. I didn't mean this to turn into just a giant complaint session. Just wanted to kind of share my thoughts on this. I do think that I suspect Wargaming is aware, certainly based on the anecdotes that are being shared by the community, as well as their own data that they collect from all of the games, that they can probably observe that there's a lot of imbalance, and they're probably scratching their heads saying, okay, how do we improve the playing environment so that the game is more satisfying to people, and we can retain our viewership, our playership as much as possible. So I am going to switch over to the remainder of the gameplay. At this point, we're down to 3 ships, Jimijaz, myself, and a Furutaka, who's actually quite low health, and he's going to get taken out here between, I think, the carrier and one of the ships that's firing on him. We're going to lose him quite soon. Jimijaz and I did get Charlie captured. We're trying to get Bravo here. In fact, we will get Bravo. But like I said, this game is going to end up being a loss, but it's not out of a lack of effort on Jimijaz's part or mine. Jimijaz and I at this point realized that we're going to have to continue to sink ships. We're not going to win this game based on points at this time. There goes the Furutaka that I mentioned earlier. And so we're just going to try to focus our effort on sinking ships as quickly as we can. I'm going to face off against the Wyoming here. Jimijaz intends to head south. You may have noticed a couple of minutes ago that he pinged on the south part of the map. He suspected that he was being detected by one of the carriers. This is a time to go carrier hunting, and that's probably another topic for another video. But in an effort to have any chance of salvaging this game, going carrier hunting, at least to try to get a quick kill, is not necessarily a bad idea. And speaking of quick kills, I get a really nice devastating strike on the Furitaka, with I think that was a double or triple citadel to take him out of the match. So we've brought this back to a 4-ship deficit, but like I said, this is still going to be a loss. Jimijaz is going to shoot down a lot of planes here because I think one of the carriers does know that Jimijaz is looking for him, and so he's going to be the focus of at least one of the carriers. I know that I'm being dropped by the carrier. Now, we're going to switch back to my perspective in the Cesare here in a moment. In fact, here we go. I'm working to try to finish off the Wyoming. Now, the problem I have is that I'm going to be in a crossfire. There is a Congo that's on the very north side of Bravo. He is going to have a pretty good angle on me. I'm kind of stuck. In fact, there I take a very sizable salvo. I'm quite certain at least there was a citadel hit in there. Unfortunately, I can't angle away from him much more because I'll just end up running into the island. So my goal here is to get the Wyoming down with this next salvo and then try to angle away a little more. He is able to breach my bow because Tier 5 battleships have 25 millimeter bows. I do finish off the Wyoming. Fortunately, I don't take too much damage from the carrier, but there is again another big salvo from the Congo. At this point, I just have no health to try to take another salvo. I can't. It's going to be kind of hard for me to turn here. I am going to take another torpedo. It's not going to quite sink me. Fortunately, no flooding. And then the Kamikaze shows up right here. I realize at this point, and there he does set me on fire. I know I'm doomed, so I'm going to squeeze off one more shot just as I go down. I do get the Kamikaze, earn high caliber, Kraken Unleashed, and just a flesh wound achievement. But it's kind of all for naught. Jimijaz does finally end up locating one of the aircraft carriers, and he won't have quite enough time to finish off the carrier because the carrier is sailing away. One thing I should point out here is that Jimijaz initially starts with high explosive, obviously with the carrier being angled against him. I had suggested to him as the carrier starts to turn more broadside that he switch to AP. There, Jimijaz has just earned AA Defense Expert, a reflection of the number of planes he's been shooting down. But Jimijaz will switch to armor piercing, but it really won't be very effective, which I was quite surprised by because these Tier 4 carriers are basically paper. And so I was actually quite surprised that he wasn't able to land any really solid hits with these 180 millimeter rounds. But like I said, at this point it doesn't matter that we have no caps and the opposition is going to win here in just a few moments. Jimijaz is going to survive the match, but unfortunately he won't be able to finish off the air carrier before time or before the opponents get to 1,000 points. So very frustrating match in terms of us individually doing well, but the whole team collectively was completely dominated, and I think that's a reflection of often how a lot of very good games for individuals go. They're enabled precisely because there is a lack of contribution from their allies. And so I'll leave the results up. You can see how we did relative to our opponents, and see how we did individually. So I hope you appreciated the input and feedback here, as well as the commentary on the replay. Please do leave your comments below. And as always, we hope to see you out there on the virtual seas, and we wish you happy sailing.